Hey everyone, how you doing? And welcome to another episode of the John Riley Project. It's Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. This is episode number 337 of this podcast. So thanks for joining me. This is a podcast all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We like to cover a lot of news topics, both locally here in the San Diego County community, as well as some national topics as well. It's funny because in my last podcast episode, there's so much going on nationally, and I generally try to focus more on local. But I'll tell you what, I put some national stories out there, lots of response on my YouTube channel. So it just goes to show you that's what people are thinking about. That's what they're worrying about, or a lot of national issues. Love covering local politics here in San Diego and in my hometown of Poway. And I'm going to do that today as well. But just gives you a kind of a sense of proportion and what the audience is. And when you get real niche and focus on just a really, really, really narrow target, sometimes your audiences aren't too big. So nice to kind of blend in some of the national as well as some of the local. So anyways, what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk about the irrationality of politics. And oh my God, there's just so much nonsense in the media right now, from candidates, from talking heads, even from people on social media. And it doesn't matter if they're Republicans or Democrats or progressives or conservatives, just a lot of nonsense, a lot of irrationality. We'll talk a little bit about that. I want to talk also about home ownership levels in poor states versus rich states, and how that kind of is playing out locally here in our community in San Diego, and kind of to break down some myths there. Some of the numbers were really interesting. So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about local stuff here in Poway. And I want to discuss here in our hometown, I've been talking about the Lifetime Fitness facility that's going to be going in, or potentially going in North Poway at the farm in Poway. And that's getting a lot of resistance from local groups, local community leaders. The city council is going to be entertaining a proposal for that, probably going to go on the ballot. But the Green Valley Civic Association did a survey of their members and made a recommendation to the Poway City Council. I want to break that down for you. We also have Poway Unified in the news again. Again, our former superintendent, who has been disgraced, has now been double disgraced. And we'll talk about Poway Unified. I know a lot of people have their hair on fire about all the things going on in our local school district. And then we're going to open it up. We've got our community forum where I respond to social media comments. And of course, I always welcome your thoughts and comments. So if you have a take, you have a question, you want to get your, speak your piece, just type it in the live chat on Facebook, X, or on YouTube, and we'll get you involved. And then just two more pieces of business before we start. If you have any questions or comments about this podcast, you want to be a guest, you want to recommend a guest, maybe you want to support what we're doing financially, make voluntary donation, or just want to get on our email list, go to my website, johnrileyproject.com. And you can also shop at happiness76.com, which is an e-commerce store that I've created that has a lot of content consistent with what we talk about here in the podcast: shirts, hats, coffee mugs, puzzles, coasters, all kinds of things that we've created that we think are reflective of the topics we discuss on the podcast. That's happiness76.com. Okay. Now I want to talk here. Let's kick this off. We're going to talk about a national issue, but really this sort of thing happens at the national level, at the regional, state level, and even at the local level. And it's what we're seeing, this flood of irrationality. I mean, have you been seeing this, talking to your friends and family? You get on social media, you interact with people, and there's just a lot of nonsense that's being written out there. A lot of almost sort of a abdication of reality. People not really focused on what's real, what's not. People stuck in a lot of, I guess, how should we say this, in political silos, and they just don't communicate effectively. And that's part of what I try to break down in this podcast, is dealing with facts. I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat, I'm independent. And I want to be able to break down some of these myths, because everyone seems to be in the red camp or the blue camp these days. But it is an election year. There's a lot of propaganda going on. Candidates, their supporters. I mean, geez, everything to do with the whole Trump-Biden election is just bananas. Our local elections are starting to percolate. I think as we get closer to Labor Day, we're going to see a lot more action there, and even in our statewide elections. So this is like the calm before the storm, or the darkest before the dawn, as it were. And so what's going on? You got the news media is complicit in this. They're repeating a lot of talking points that come from each of these parties. Kind of makes you question them as well. And the tribalism is just so thick. It's, if you're on Team Red, you automatically like everything the Team Red likes and dislike everything the Team Blue likes. And vice versa, the tribalism. It's like Red Sox and Yankees fans, or, Padres and Dodgers fans, just fighting amongst each other, but so difficult to get people to have an objective opinion or an objective assessment of what's going on. I mean, I often think to myself, whatever happened to this idea of thinking for yourself? Whatever happened to our friends on the left used to always say, question authority. And now you see our friends on the left falling in line with authority. Again, it's nuts what's going on out there. So I want to bring up just a few examples of this. And some of these are just very obvious. I mean, the first one is Joe Biden and his mental decline. And, we saw that in the debate performance a few weeks ago. We've seen that in a few cases, even after the debate. Biden's going around saying, just one bad night. It's not a big deal. But this has been evident for not just months. It's been evident for years. I mean, this was a question even in the election of 2020, but even shortly after President Joe Biden was elected, we have seen his mental decline. We have seen him look like a deer in the headlights. We have seen him stumble and bumble, fall down, get tongue-tied, lose his train of thought. This has been going on for a while, and yet the Democrats seem to be in complete denial of this. They tell us on one hand that Trump is a threat to democracy. Trump is a huge problem in America. We must defeat Trump. And yet they're rolling out a dude, Joe Biden, who is like 81 years old and is not fully there. And you're thinking, well, how are we supposed to take the Democrats seriously on this when they have a candidate that frankly didn't even get challenged in the primaries? This is from the Democrats that say that democracy is under assault, while at the same time just shutting down Democratic primaries in some states, having no Democratic primary debates. Dean Phillips, Marianne Williamson, there were other people that would have jumped in and challenged, but they didn't even have the debate. In some cases, they don't even have opposing candidates on the ballot because of the way the system is rigged. And so they've been cloaking Joe Biden's mental capabilities really for quite a while. He's been carefully managed. And if we're questioning whether or not Joe Biden is good enough to be a candidate in 2024, how in the heck can he be a president for the next 4+ years? So it's like this irrationality of Democrats denying the truth about what's going on with Joe Biden, while at the same time telling us how important it is to vote for him. It's just insane. I was thinking about what did all this remind me of? Is, you remember Marie Kondo? She was that lady that would go in and help people clean up their mess and get rid of all the stuff people are hoarding. And she would often say, it's okay to let go of some of the clothes and things that you have. I think it's okay to let go of Joe Biden. We can thank Joe Biden for accomplishing the most important thing that he had to accomplish in 2020, which was defeating Donald Trump. But he's done his piece. He said he was going to be a transition candidate to a younger generation. So we should be like Marie Kondo. We should say thank you and say, now it's time for the next generation. It's time for the next thing. And we're going to move Joe Biden out the door. That's what it should be right now if we're thinking rationally. But the Democrats aren't. And they're plunging into this Democratic National Convention with this guy, Joe Biden, who I question if he has the ability to put all this together and to run our nation. In many ways, he just seems like a puppet, a figurehead, that there are people behind the scenes that are calling the shots, because it's clear that he's not capable of it. But it's not just Joe Biden. There's irrationality around Donald Trump. I mean, the people are rallying for Donald Trump, saying, this guy is a leader. He's good for America. This is, God's choice, Donald Trump. But this is a guy with 34 felonies. He's got more trials coming up. He's already been found guilty in a court of law of raping E. Jean Carroll and has to pay restitution for that. This is a guy that is also uttering nonsense at his rallies, talking about Hannibal Lecter and just talking about batteries and boats and sharks and weird ass shit in his rallies. And boy, the fans, the tribalism is just thick. They support everything this guy says. And it doesn't matter if there are contradictions. It doesn't matter if he's had affairs. I mean, they love him for saying we're going to deport all the immigrants, but then they ignore the fact that 2 of his wives were immigrants, and they ignore the fact that, there's all these other contradictions with the guy. It's just insane. People saying one thing, but then believing another when it comes to Trump. There's even people that are saying, like on the Republican side, oh, Joe, Donald Trump doesn't want to be a dictator. I'm thinking, what are you talking about? He said so. He goes, well, I don't want to be a dictator. Well, maybe except on day 1, I'll be a dictator. And people say, well, no, he's kidding. It's just a joke. He doesn't really mean it. But we all know that presidents have a tremendous amount of power to sign executive orders to essentially decree or proclaim brand new law without even having to go through Congress. So if a president can unilaterally make decisions to change the rules, to increase tariffs, to build border walls, to do all kinds of other things, if a president can do that just by signing an executive order, then what does that make them? A king, a dictator? Well, yeah. And so we know Trump is going to want to do that. He said he's going to do it. And frankly, he did do that when he was elected after when he was inaugurated in 2017. Joe Biden did the same thing. So did Barack Obama. All the presidents do that. You hear him in the debates. On day 1, I will do this, I will do that, because they want to sign executive orders. While they'll tell you, oh, no, he's not going to be a dictator. The Republicans will say that. Meanwhile, the Democrats will say, oh, we believe in democracy. Democracy is under assault. We need to protect democracy. And yet they want the president to have executive powers so that they don't have to go through Congress and go through the democratic process and the separations of power that our founding fathers have built for America. So huge irrationality. I mean, even take this mass deportation idea from Trump and the conservatives, or I should say the MAGA crowd, because they're not really conservative. How in the hell are you going to deport all these people? Well, the first question is how are you going to identify the people that need to be deported? Okay, regardless of how you're going to round them up and ship them out, how do you figure out who's here illegally? I mean, we're going to have like really aggressive policies where the police and other authorities are going to be checking people, to see if you've got a green card, to see if you've got a birth certificate. I mean, it's going to be like, people say that Trump's like Hitler, but it's going to be like, Germans, Nazis, show me your papers. I mean, how else are they going to ever be able to figure out who is here illegally? And then on top of it, how can you demand people to present their documentation when we have a Fourth Amendment that says people should not be subject to unreasonable searches, that people should be safe in their persons? I mean, in order to do this, you would have to violate the Fourth Amendment to go around demanding paperwork and documentation to prove who you are. And then even imagine if they figured out a way to identify everyone that needs to be deported. How in the hell are you going to do it? He says he wants to round people up and put them in camps and then eventually send them out of the country. In a nation that's built on freedom, on liberty, how in the hell is this consistent? It makes no sense. I mean, even here in my hometown of Poway, California, which is a suburb here of San Diego, I'll drive down the street here on Sundays and all the Trump supporters are there on the, quote, 4 corners of freedom. That's what they call it, where all the Trump supporters are there waving their American flags, showing their signs, and they're saying, you know, freedom, liberty, that's what Donald Trump is for. And then a few signs over, someone else is holding up a sign that says deport all the illegals. It's, you look at it, you see the contradiction straight in front of you, and yet this irrationality continues and it continues. You know, even here in my hometown of Poway, I also, you know, I get in trouble sometimes on social media, interacting with some of our locals. And I'm just asking questions, trying to understand why people believe what they believe. One of the things that's going around right now in our town is, should voters have the ability or the right to make land use decisions that could affect or determine or control how other people use their property? And you'll see people say so blatantly. They'll say, hey, did that project affect others? Did it cause others to be inconvenienced or to suffer in any sort of way? Well, then it needs to go to a ballot. But then when you call them out on it, that they are demanding votes for just about every construction project, they go, oh, no, not all of them, just some of them. It's just, again, irrationality, people talking out of two sides of their mouth. How about, here's another one. I mean, the Project 2025 one is amazing. I have seen so much disinformation about that. I'm going to probably go through that and break it down in a future podcast, because there are some things in Project 2025 that are just horrific, and some things that I kind of like. But one of the things you're hearing people are saying is, oh, if Project 2025 passes, the Republicans are going to get rid of Social Security. And you're thinking, there's no way this is ever going to happen. This is the sort of thing that they've been saying for years, that they're going to kill Social Security. And what do the Republicans end up doing? They keep expanding it and growing it. Republicans even grew Medicare. So it's a lot of this denial of reality. I mean, that's what I see. I mean, you see people that are in denial about the fiscal crisis of Social Security, because, you know, in about 10 years, there's not going to be enough money to fulfill all the promises made, because the payouts of Social Security have been exceeding the tax revenue for some time now. And when we get to about 2033, the trust fund is going to be empty. There are some people that are in denial that that's ever going to happen. But at the same time, there's other people that are in denial about, you know, whether the Republicans are going to kill Social Security. So again, nonsense. I mean, even with electric vehicles, you know, we drive an EV and we love EVs, and people saying such just insane nonsense, like, you know, all EVs consume fossil fuel. Like, that's not true at all. Not at all. I mean, Frank, our two EVs are powered by solar, you know, from our from the solar panels on our garage. And frankly, most you know, some people say that, oh yeah, EVs are powered by coal, but really here in California, there's almost zero coal that is in our grid. Our grid is mostly powered by natural gas, which is a fossil fuel, but one of the, you know, the less impactful of them all, but also wind and solar and other energy sources. So just myths, irrationality, just, it's constant. How about the ones that, remember, like back in the day, the Republicans said, and they're actually saying it now, we believe in small government. We believe in cutting spending. That's another load of BS too. They never do. They always expand their spending. They always expand not just the spending, but the debt. Some people say, oh, the Republicans want to get the government out of your personal life. And you go, that's not true at all. You know, we see Republicans that want to tell women what they can and cannot do with their bodies. We're seeing governments saying that they want to round up people and ship them out of America. And yet we're supposed to believe that they want to get government out of your personal life. We hear cases like, you know, Republicans are conservative. You remember back when Bill Clinton was president, and, you know, he had the Monica Lewinsky affair, and, you know, the Republicans, all they wanted to do was bring back dignity into the White House. And that's why they wanted George W. Bush, because they didn't want to have, you know, some hound dog, some scoundrel that's, you know, having affairs and other kinds of things on the side. And now they're backing Donald Trump. I mean, these are evangelicals that are backing Donald Trump, a liar, a con man. All these people are in denial of reality as well. Or have you ever heard the other comments? Oh yeah, President Clinton, he reduced the national debt. That's false too. National debt went up every year under President Clinton, every single year. Some people will say, "Oh yeah, the Democrats, they're fiscally responsible." No. I mean, if you look at the national debt for the United States of America, about half of it occurred when a Republican is in the White House, and about half of it occurred when a Democrat was in the White House. And a good portion of that time, the opposing party was controlling at least one or both of the chambers of Congress. Neither party's fiscally responsible, even though they tell you that. You hear cases where people refer to the Democrats as liberal. Democrats are not liberal. Because what does liberal mean? Liberal means that you stand for individual rights. You stand for free markets, free enterprise. Liberal means, that you support democracy, but you also support each individual's right to their own life. According to that definition, I'm a liberal, but Democrats are not liberals. Republicans aren't conservatives, yet they call themselves that all the time. And it just goes on and on and on. None of these things are true. What do you think? Do you have any good examples of this where maybe it's on your team's side or the other team's side where you've seen this irrationality of people that are believing in nonsense or will say one thing and then right next door to it, there's some contradiction that these people are blind to. If so, tell me what you think in the show notes, or tell me what you think in the live chat. Just type it in on Facebook, X, or on Twitter. Okay. I want to move on. We're going to talk about home ownership levels in poor states versus rich states. And I'm going to have a Poway News Roundup. We're going to talk about some new updates with Lifetime Fitness, talk a little bit about Poway Unified School District, and we have our community forum. But I do invite you to go to happiness76.com. Happiness 76 is our e-commerce site where we have t-shirts and mugs and all kinds of great things celebrating our inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, and we even got some gear there for electric vehicle owners and for people that live here in my hometown of Poway. So if you want to get some cool swag, to show off what you believe, if you believe in liberty or you believe in happiness or you believe in just supporting your hometown, go to happiness76.com. We really appreciate your support. Okay, let's move on. And we're now going to talk about housing. And this was a study that I saw that came out first in a CNN article. And this was really interesting to me. And that's why I want to share it with you. Okay, so there's something weird going on with my camera view on one of those screens. Did you notice that? There's like a split screen that's going on there. I don't know. Maybe it's just happening on my side. I'm not sure. But anyways, here's a story, and it was on CNN, and it says these states have some of the poorest Americans and the highest home ownership rates. That's an attention-grabbing headline, right? Because housing right now, where we live in California, is so expensive. And how is it that there's more people buying houses in poor states than in rich states? Well, this particular person was a realtor in West Virginia and said you can get a house with 90 acres for under $500,000, which is probably a lot for West Virginia. But it's just fascinating to me that we see this. I mean, here's the chart, and I'm going to bring this up if you can see this on your screen. And it says along the y-axis is their average income. And along the x-axis is the percent of home ownership. And if you look on the far right-hand side, near the bottom is West Virginia. And they have a very low income, but a very high home ownership level. And then if you look in the upper left, you see New York and California that have very high income levels, but very low, or relatively low, home ownership rates. Now, what do you think of this? Is this counterintuitive to you? Because I think a lot of people thought that, oh, well, if you move to California and you get a high paying job, it's going to be a lot easier to buy a house out there because you're going to make more money. Some people think that, and they think that in some of the poorer states, people are going to be so poor that they won't even be able to afford a place to live in. But in fact, the opposite is true. Housing in high income states and so-called rich states like California, like California and New York is very, very expensive. And why? Why is this the case? Well, demographics, competition for homes, and strict zoning regulations all play a role in the cost of real estate. And I'm reading this right up from the article. So according to the Federal Reserve data, West Virginia's average personal income of $52,500 per capita is the second lowest in the United States. However, despite its relatively low personal income levels, it has the highest homeownership rate of all 50 states at 77%, according to the U.S. Census data. Mississippi, the only state with a lower average personal income than West Virginia, has the third highest homeownership rate in the country. Now, this to me is interesting because we've often talked about homelessness in San Diego, California, across the United States, and what's the cause of homelessness? Some say it's drugs, it's alcohol, it's financial problems. I mean, there's a bunch of theories. Everyone's kind of got their opinion. But if you really look at the data, the real reason that there's homelessness in California to such a high degree is because housing is so expensive. Even if you want to blame drugs and alcohol and mental health in California as the cause for homelessness, which I agree, those are factors, but they're not the primary. Well, do you think people in West Virginia or Mississippi or some other poorer states do you think there's no homelessness or drug addiction in those other states? Of course there is. There's mental health crises in West Virginia, in Alabama, in Mississippi. The same is true with drug addiction and alcoholism, but there's not a big homelessness problem because housing is a lot less expensive. And I think we lose sight of that here in California. We immediately want, to blame someone else for the price of housing, or we want to elect new leaders in our local city governments, or we want to blame rich, greedy people or corporations or rich people with their vacation homes for the reason why housing prices are so high. But ultimately, it's oftentimes the policies in these high income states that create it. I mean, that's one of the things I comment a lot about in my hometown of Poway, about how regulations and zoning laws that have prevented development from occurring are the reasons why that we have a surging home prices in our community. There's a few other comments from this article that I thought was good. According to Mike Simonson, the founder of the real estate analytics firm Atlas Research, he said, "I would have expected that the more wealthy a place is, the more likely that its people can afford a home. It turns out the opposite is true." Now, this is part of their theory to explain this. They said big cities attract people who are in transition or the growth stage of their lives. They're more interested in renting, or they may be more transient. That's certainly true. Many of these cities, such as New York and San Francisco, also attract buyers from across the United States and internationally, bidding up the price of homes. Okay, so you've got a lot more people moving into these big cities. You've got people that maybe aren't necessarily ready to buy yet because they're young professionals just getting their careers started or kind of getting their adult life started. Those play a role. They're people, we see a lot of people that are foreign that are purchasing property, even people in the United States moving around buying property. But this article goes on to say there's another reason the big cities skew the data. According to Lori Goodman, the founder of the Housing Policy Center at the Urban Institute, she said, large cities and their surrounding suburbs also have strict zoning laws that dictate how land may be used. Zoning makes land much more expensive because you're restricting the use of it. She added that land is very scarce in large cities, driving up the cost of buying a home even further. A growing number of local and state governments, led by both Democrats and Republicans, have begun to rethink zoning laws in response to the nationwide housing shortage. Some local governments have even begun loosening laws to convert vacated office space into affordable housing. Tell me what you think of that. Now, when I talk to some of our friends on the left, some of our more progressive friends, particularly here in my hometown of Poway, California, and we talk about housing and why is housing expensive and what should we do to make housing more expensive, we'll hear from our friends on the left that, oh, we need more affordable housing. We need it to be subsidized. Those big corporations, when they build 20 homes, they should make 2 of them for affordable housing, and have another 2 or 3 of them for seniors or for veterans. Or we need to have low income loans, or we need to provide a first time home buyer help on a down payment, or we need some other program to help overcome the fact that the prices are high. But it doesn't seem to register with a lot of our friends on the left that really we should be addressing not the symptom, but the cause. And the cause is that demand is far exceeding supply. That's why we have a housing crisis. And that's why in California, in San Diego in particular, where there is very little land left to build on, housing is much more expensive. And you get to the point where not only is there very little dirt to build on in San Diego County, that dirt that is available, to potentially build on, a lot of it is zoned for open space. It's zoned to be ineligible to build anything there. Or there are other cases where housing, multi-dwelling units, apartment buildings are limited in San Diego. We already said there's not enough dirt. There's not enough space to build horizontally, but they set limits on it vertically so that apartment buildings can only be 3 or 4 stories high. And we especially see this with the California Coastal Commission that prevents a lot of high-rise condos along the beach. They don't want to disrupt or destroy people's view, but doing that is a zoning regulation that limits the supply and in turn causes prices to go up. So it's funny in a way that the people that are most concerned about homelessness, most concerned about housing unaffordability, are actually the ones that are often pushing policies that drive up those prices. Now, of course, do you want to move to West Virginia or Mississippi? People in California probably are pretty happy in California. That's why they're here. I know there's a certain percentage of the population that's leaving, but California is still getting immigrants and there's still population growth. But yeah, obviously, home prices are going to be lower in poorer states. Therefore, owner occupancy rates are going to be higher. And you're not going to have the case of people that maybe lost a job, are down on their luck, and then suddenly don't have enough money to pay the rent. Because the rent is always going to be a lot more affordable in some of those poorer states, which, by the way, have very little regulation. One crazy example is Houston, Texas. And my son lives in Houston, and he's been there for a little over a year. And we went out there and visited him. And it's a really interesting city. It's very different than a lot of other parts of Texas. Very international, very cosmopolitan, a thriving economy, a great place to be if you're a healthcare worker because of all the research and hospitals they have in Houston. But Houston usually gets slammed because they have very little zoning, that the whole city is just a big sprawl. And that's true. There is a great deal of that. And in some cases that does create problems for traffic. But you know what else is true in Houston? The cost of living is dramatically lower there than in many other parts of America. A lot lower than California, because they're able to build more and they're able to provide more supply. So now, again, I'm not saying Texas is one of the poor states, but it's not as wealthy as California. But at the same time, it's interesting that, or almost counterintuitive, that home ownership levels are higher in poor states, where, by the way, they don't have as many restrictions on land use or on construction. Now, governments are getting creative in their attempts to create new housing in other ways. In September, New York City Mayor Eric Adams announced an effort to eliminate mandates that parking spaces be included in with new construction, freeing up the building of more homes. We see this in San Diego as well, because there are regulations that say for every unit or every bedroom, you need X number of parking spaces. And you need a lot of land for all those cars. But if people are living downtown, or if they're living in another high density area where there's a lot of walkability, or they happen to be living near transit, there's no reason why you can't build more high density housing without parking requirements, rather than having one parking space per unit or two parking spaces per unit. Maybe you only have a half a parking space per unit, or even less than that. For some people, that makes a lot of sense, because they're going to find a place that's more affordable in an area where they want to live, and they don't need a car because they don't have one, or they choose not to use one. But we have problems here in California where people are upset about parking. And they want more parking and more parking, and then they wonder why housing is so darn expensive. We even see this here in my hometown of Poway. Unbelievable stuff. So tell me what your thoughts are there. I think we have a serious housing crisis, and in my opinion, it's entirely caused, well, not entirely, but a significant portion, I'd say over half the problem, is related to zoning laws or other regulations that make construction either illegal or massively difficult and expensive. I mean, we see that in single family home neighborhoods where people are saying, don't put in ADUs. I don't want you putting like a 4-unit apartment building in your backyard. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? When we have these kinds of rules put in place by NIMBYs that prevent development, that give voters the right to stop development, that give voters the right to declare large swaths of land as open space, what they're doing is making housing more expensive for everybody else. And by the way, if you already happen to own a home, you see your home value go up. And oftentimes it's existing homeowners that are the ones that are demanding no more growth. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So let's move on. So I've got a ton here to go. We want to get into, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the news here in my hometown of Poway. So let's get into some of that. But before we do, I just want to chat briefly about another podcast I do. I co-host a podcast with Lee Hacksaw Hamilton every Monday and Thursday at 1 o'clock Pacific time. And we live stream right here from the John Riley Project podcast studios, talking sports. So if you love sports, if you like talking about the Dodgers, the Padres, the Giants, the Angels, the Yankees, the Red Sox, if you want to talk about the NFL, the NBA, NHL, international soccer, boy, we cover it all. So look up Lee Hacksaw Hamilton wherever you get your podcasts. You can also look up Lee Hacksaw Hamilton on YouTube. We got a ton of content out there, and we live stream every Monday and Thursday. So be sure to check that out. I'm kind of like Lee's wingman. I'm like his Ed McMahon. And Lee Hacksaw Hamilton, of course, the legendary sports talk radio pioneer here in San Diego, also the former play-by-play man of the San Diego Chargers, the Seattle Seahawks, USC Trojan football, Arizona State Sun Devil football, and many other professional and college teams throughout America. What a great guy. So please join us there. And again, if you want to learn more about my podcast, you like to be a guest, you want to recommend a guest, get on our mailing list. Maybe even you might want to donate a couple of bucks just to support what we're doing. Go to my website, johnrileyproject.com, and I've got some detail there. All right. Now let's switch it up. Now, okay, we kind of covered some national issues. We talked a little bit about the irrationality of politics and Trump and Biden, talking a little bit about home ownership, in various states. Now let's zero in locally, because I know that I have a lot of listeners and viewers that want me to cover Poway content, which is my hometown of Poway. And I want to talk here about the Green Valley Civic Association. And first of all, let's just kind of set the table on who all these entities are. So we have three people in the mix, or three organizations in the mix here. One is the city of Poway, two is the Green Valley Civic Association, and the third is Lifetime Fitness. So the Green Valley Civic Association is kind of like it's not really a homeowners association, although there is some similarity, but it's a nonprofit group that attempts to represent the interests of the people that live in the northern portion of Poway, California, 92064. And Green Valley is another name for North Poway. So this organization, the Green Valley Civic Association, I think has been in existence for probably 60 years, and they've historically have had a great deal of influence on our city council. In fact, a lot of our former mayors and our former city council members, before they went to district voting, a lot of them lived in Green Valley. A lot of them lived in North Poway. And generally speaking, that's where a lot of the higher income families live and where the higher home value houses are as well. And they came out with a press release talking about the Lifetime Fitness facility, which is going to go in, or which is being proposed to go into the farm in Poway, which is the new housing development that has replaced the Stone Ridge Country Club. And remember, that was voted on by the people, because originally when it was a country club, when it was a golf course, and they had swimming pools and tennis clubs and that sort of thing there, back then that land was zoned to be off limits for housing, like I said previously. It was zoned to be open space recreational. It took a vote of the people to transition that to a housing, an area that is zoned for single family homes, so for residential housing. And it took them 2 tries to do it. Well, they finally passed it in 2020. And as part of that plan, they were going to have a very modest fitness club there, like 3,000 square feet, nothing super big, but, kind of modest, in a little commercial district in the center of the farm in Poway. But now they want to change the plan, a plan that had previously been approved by the voters, that was locked in, that there could be no changes. And so now this proposal will put in a Lifetime Fitness facility that is dramatically bigger than the one that was proposed by, order of magnitude of like 30. Now the people that the owner of the land, Kevin McNamara, Lifetime Fitness, they want to revise the plan to put in this large facility. And it's probably going to need to go to a vote. But the first thing it has to do is go before the city council here in Poway. And the city council is going to weigh in on the project and determine, will this go to the vote? Will they just approve it? Or will they just say no to everything? Now, I predict it's probably going to go to a vote. But the Green Valley Civic Association, who, by the way, historically has had huge influence on the Poway City Council, they came out with their own press release opposing Lifetime Fitness. And I want to read you portions of this because I found this to be very, very interesting. The Green Valley Civic Association opposes the proposed 30,500 square foot Lifetime Fitness facility at the farm development in Poway. As a community leader for over 60 years, we believe this proposal does not align with the community's long-term vision and needs. We have urged Poway City Council not to approve modifications to the farm-specific plan, which currently allows for a 2,953 square foot fitness club. They go on to say, that they say it's a significant 10 times the size increase. That may be true of just the building. But when you look at a lot of the amenities and the outdoor pickleball courts and tennis courts and swimming pools and yoga classes outdoors, this is a lot more in size. I think it can be as much as, around 90,000 square feet. According to the Green Valley Civic Association, they said the size of the Lifetime Club raises serious concerns, particularly regarding traffic safety. A critical issue is that Good Eve Drive, a 25-mile-per-hour street, would serve as the main access point to this commercial development. The additional traffic generated by such a large facility would pose a danger to residents, especially children playing in their yards at the neighborhood park on Good Eve. Okay, so does this surprise you? First of all, it doesn't surprise me because historically the Green Valley Civic Association has represented the interests of North Poway, and the interests of North Poway have generally been to keep Poway the city in the country, to preserve their lots in Poway in the northern portion where people are living on half an acre, 1 acre, 2 acres, maybe more, that have ranch style homes, where there is very little commercial space. And there are almost no multifamily dwelling apartment buildings or condominiums. And historically, there's been resistance to that here in Poway. And that's why they passed Prop FF in the late 1980s to prevent the city council from changing zoning to make Poway something different than the city in the country. Which, interesting, Prop FF didn't apply to the whole city. It only really applied to mostly North Poway, Green Valley area, and some selective portions of South Poway. Of course, the city council approved a lot of the housing that we're seeing on Poway Road and other parts of Poway. But the Green Valley Civic Association is saying, we don't want Lifetime Fitness here. And they did a survey, and the results of the survey are incredible. Their press release says, moreover, our recent survey completed by over 440 local residents revealed that nearly 80% are opposed to Lifetime proposal, with 72% preferring the originally approved 3,000 square foot fitness club. Only 37% of respondents expressed any interest in seeing any other proposals for the site. These numbers clearly indicate that the majority of the community does not support Lifetime Fitness plan and values maintaining the integrity of the specific plan. Okay, so for all of the NIMBYs in town, and you know who you are, I won't name names, you must be overjoyed hearing this. That the Green Valley Civic Association not only wants to deny Lifetime, but they're advocating for what you advocate in South Poway. Pretty interesting. But in a lot of ways, this sort of confirms what I kind of expected. I expected that in the 2017 vote here in Poway, I figured for sure it was going to lose because Michael Schlesinger, people didn't like him. What he did in the Escondido Country Club, spreading manure to try to upset the parents or upset the residents. They didn't like his tactics, and his program was denied by the voters in 2017. 2020 rolls around. Kevin McNamara becomes the new spokesman, a person that a lot of people in Poway know and like and trust. And he came forward with a plan, and it passed. But it was promised that it wouldn't change. Meanwhile, all this activity, all this additional development going on all over our hometown of Poway, people are angry, people are upset, people want to still have some form of control over other people. People still want to have some ability to tell other people, no, you can't build that. And here we are. So this, I'm a supporter of Lifetime Fitness going in at the farm, primarily because I support property rights. I think that, these zoning regulations are the reason we have a housing crisis. People, if you own your land, you should be able to build on it. It's your life. You should be able to choose. It's your body. You should be able to choose. It's your land. You should be able to choose, as long as you're not violating the rights of other people. But I think we're seeing here now that the Lifetime Fitness people, they're already getting resistance from people in South Poway. And now this is significant. 80%, almost 80% of the people that responded to the Green Valley Civic Association survey said, no, we don't want to see a change here. This indicates to me that now Lifetime Fitness is going to have a huge challenge on their hands. They're going to have to really sell this and share all of the amenities to the public to get them to vote on it, when their club primarily caters to the very wealthy. It's a high-end club with with spas and massage and yoga and all kinds of specialized classes with membership fees roughly around $300 a month, depending on how they're going to price it. But that was kind of the ballpark. It's not like a, $10 a month Choose Fitness or 24/7 Fitness subscription plan. It's a lot more expensive. Do you think this is going to pass if it went to a vote? I question that. It seems like the vibe in Poway would be a no. Now the issue is, will it go to what will the city council do? And we're going to find that out on the 16th of July. And today's the 10th. So in 9 days, the Poway City Council is going to vote on this issue. They're specifically going to vote on the proposal. Is the proposal acceptable? Does the proposal meet all of their criteria? Has it been given the due diligence to review everything? I'm sure the city council is probably going to ask Lifetime, change this, move this, modify that, because they usually do that on these projects. But then the question is are they going to put it to a vote? My hunch is yes. I don't think they're going to rubber stamp it and approve it. I mean, if they did, all hell would break loose, because the voters voted on this plan not to change it. Now, in my opinion, I don't think voters should be able to control other people's property. Just as I think voters shouldn't be able to control a woman's body. But at the same time, I think they're going to probably put it out to a vote. And we're going to find out on July 16th. I'm going to go to that city council meeting. We'll see. I'm just kind of curious. I'll be a fly on the wall in the back. I want to see how this all shakes out, because there's going to be a lot of people there, mostly against it, speaking to the city council. So that's going to be on July 16th in the evening. I don't know the exact time. I'll be able to look it up. And you should look it up as well if you find this to be a particularly hot issue. But can you believe that? The Green Valley Civic Association is saying no. We don't want the Lifetime Fitness facility here. It's too big. There's going to be too much traffic, and our children are going to be at risk playing in the park. There are going to be too many cars. And this is a big problem. By the way, do you really think that's the reason that Green Valley Civic Association is objecting to it? The safety of the children? It's usually, of course, that's one of the issues, but is that the number one? Probably not. The number one is they just want to keep a big commercial facility out of North Poway. And for some other people, their primary reason for opposing Lifetime Fitness is they just want to stick it to the man. They're tired of all the construction in Poway. But they're going to use traffic studies, and they're going to use, children in the park and some of these kind of emotional heartstrings to pull on to make it a heated emotional issue, to try to generate more people pushing this on the no vote. So tell me what you think of this. And if you're watching the live stream, tell me in the live chat. You can just type in on Facebook, X, or YouTube what you think. I'll get you involved in the conversation. Since we're talking about Poway, look, you see down there on my Chiron on the screen, there's PowayStore.com. I created a little store. A lot of Poway swag, Poway t-shirts, Poway coasters, and Poway puzzles of Lake Poway and of Old Poway Park. If you want to check any of that out, go to PowayStore.com. When you do, you'll realize it takes you to a sub page of my happiness76.com website. But check it out. And we're giving out 20% discounts there. Just use the promo code Poway20 to get involved. One other public service announcement that I'm going to make here, and this is for our friends in Poway that are watching and listening. Our Poway Historical Society is actually looking for amateur actors. So there is a call for amateur actors needed. Poway Historical and Memorial Society will produce a play called A Hardy Poway Legend at their 60th anniversary celebration on September 14th, 2024 at Old Poway Park. So if you're interested in being an actor in that play, because they have a number of spots they need to fill, to join the team, auditions will be held on July 15th. Today's the 10th. So on July 15th in Poway at Old Poway Park at Templars Hall, located at 14114 Midland Road, starting at 5:30 p.m. If you're interested in auditioning or have any questions, email Vanessa Jane adevan@gmail.com. Let me spell that for you. It's VanessaJaneAdeven Vanessa Jane Adevan@gmail.com. Contact her for questions if you want to get involved. They'll probably ask you for a headshot, maybe some acting experience that you have. But this is a great time to do something fun in the community here in our hometown of Poway. So go check that out. The Poway Historical Society, Vanessa Jane Advent@gmail.com, if you want to be an actor in this play. Okay, last topic on the table before we get to our community forum is I want to talk briefly about Poway Unified School District. And oh my God, they're in the news again. The Poway Unified School District. And where are my notes for that? Did I not bring them? No, here they are. Here they are. Okay, we've talked quite a bit about Poway Unified and the $1 billion bond and everything else, the disgrace of John Collins, the former superintendent. And then recently, our superintendent was dismissed, was fired by the board, Marion Kim Phelps. And you may have heard about the whole softball controversy where the girls at the softball banquet didn't clap loud enough, and there was a lot of problems, a lot of bullying, a lot of teenagers being teenagers, and our superintendent was out there defending her daughter, but doing it as superintendent and frankly violating a lot of the ethics of what is expected of a public official, particularly a superintendent of a school district. And as a result, she was investigated, she was fired. But now a new story has come forward that a retired Poway Unified employee says in a new lawsuit that the fired superintendent harassed her. So now we're getting more people coming forward saying that Marion Kim Phelps was harassing this person. So the plaintiff, her name is Amanda Marshall, she's suing Marion Kim Phelps and the school district, saying that Phelps harassed her for years with yelling, intimidation, and manipulation, and that the district didn't protect her. Okay. And then the article, this is an article, by the way, in the San Diego Union Tribune, and it's, you can go to pomeradonews.com and it's there as well. The article goes on to kind of explain the whole softball clapping controversy, but then it goes on to tell more about this woman. Her name is Amanda Marshall, and she was commenting about the softball situation, and she said, "I can totally believe that Marion Kim Phelps did this," Marshall said in an interview, referring to the softball player's accusations. "This is what she does to people." Apparently she was berating this employee, threatening her, demanding on when asking when she's going to retire, trying to move her out. The lawsuit says Phelps also harassed Marshall by, for example, taking away her access to Phelps' work schedule or work office and calendar, which made it harder for Marshall to do her job. The lawsuit also alleges Phelps discriminated against Marshall based on her age and race. According to the lawsuit, Phelps frequently asked Marshall, now 62, when she would retire, and told Marshall, quote, "If I were your age, I would retire." The lawsuit alleges that Phelps made a derogatory comment about blonde, blue-eyed women in front of Marshall, who is white and blonde, which she said suggested discriminatory intent by Phelps. Okay, well, Marion Kim Phelps is gone, okay, and I don't think she's coming back. She's suing to try to get her job back. But this was documented in the San Diego Union Tribune, and this just sort of seems to confirm what we have heard about the behavior of our former superintendent. I mean, what do you think of this? Now, it is interesting. I mean, obviously, we see cases of workplace harassment that occur in the private sector as well as here, in this case, in the public sector. And, I think we've all had a boss that has sucked, haven't we? Haven't we all had a boss that was rude, inconsiderate, maybe would get on your case, maybe yell at you a little bit, when you screwed up or you needed to kind of be, quote, motivated? That happens. I'm not excusing it, but that happens a lot. But what's interesting is that Poway Unified is 100% in on the whole woke culture. So, diversity, equity, inclusion, all of that, they're big fans of it. They promote it amongst the students. And yet we're seeing at the highest levels of the school district, not pushing for inclusion, but exclusion. When are you going to retire? Not appreciating the diversity, but slamming it. In this case, making cracks about white blonde women. This is from people that think that, we need to have equity. We need to get rid of racism. And yet we find people that are pushing a race-based message that frankly is at odds with what diversity, equity, inclusion is all about. This was crazy to me. And I don't know what's going to happen here. I mean, I think they have a superintendent that's temporary now. I think they advanced one of the associate superintendents. They're having a job search. I saw Michelle O'Connor Ratcliffe had announced that they're working with an outside firm that's going to help bring candidates forward. That's kind of their process. But there has just been so much nonsense at Poway Unified going back like 10 to 20 years. I mean, we had the $1 billion bond. We had the disgraced John Collins that was stealing money from the school district, that was unethical, had violated a lot of his terms and conditions of his contract. We've seen corruption with the relationship with lawyers and with bond refinancers. We've seen all kinds of stuff here. And when Marion Kim Phelps was first brought in, I had hope that she was going to maybe change the culture. But what happened? First of all, she was only approved by a 3-2 vote. If I recall, Michelle O'Connor Ratcliffe and TJ Zane and one more person, maybe Darsh Patel, approved her, but Charlie Sellers and Kimberly Beatty said no. She got in only on a 3-2 vote, which is surprising. But that should have been maybe some red flags right there. And sure enough, here we are. So Poway Unified seems to always get into the news, but often for the wrong reasons. So tell me what you think about Poway Unified. What's going on? It's summertime now. School will start, probably about a month, maybe 5 weeks from now. Kids will be heading back. So tell me what you think about Poway Unified School District. Our families in our community always have something to say. All right. Okay, so we're at an hour right now. I'm going to go a little longer. I'm going to just comment on some of our social media comments in our San Diego Community Forum, but there's still an open opportunity for you. So if you want to get involved in the discussion, if you have a question or comment, if you got to come out and say, Riley, you don't know what the hell you're talking about, or maybe you want to say, hey, way to go, man, I like what you're saying, or you have a question or a comment, just type it in the live chat on Facebook, on YouTube, or on X. It will appear on my screen. We'll get you involved. Okay, let's go to our community forum. And here I respond to social media comments. And let's go to our first one here. And this is from Mike Poway on YouTube. This is from Mike Devine. You might know who Mike Devine is. He's a hardcore Trumper. He's a Powegian. He's been here a long time. I think he lives in Ramona, but he still has a business here in Poway. Mike always has something to say about local politics, national politics. He's an interesting follow. On TikTok. He's always out and about here in Poway doing videos and offering his commentary. And this was about the idea of presidential immunity and whether or not Trump should have partial immunity. And remember, the Supreme Court granted the president, regardless of who it is, that they have immunity. They can't be held liable for their actions when they're acting in their role as president, which means that we are no longer equal under the law. I mean, that's been that way for a long time, actually, but it's the Supreme Court affirmed it, which was surprising, especially from some of the Supreme Court justices that insisted during their nomination hearings that nobody was above the law. Well, Mike comes out and says, does not each individual have immunity when it comes to speech? That's what the Constitution says. And they do. We do have a freedom of speech in the United States, which means that the government cannot abridge speech. Government cannot police speech. But we do know that it actually does occur, either directly or indirectly. I mean, we saw a lot of government officials that we're cracking down on disinformation that was on social media. We're seeing government officials, attempt to bully or have a direct line into a lot of social media companies and telling them, take this one down, take that one down. That's disinformation. We have President Trump, who, frankly, he ran for office in 2016 saying he was going to shut down part of the internet and make it legal to sue the press, which were both violations of the First Amendment, by the way. But does each individual have immunity on free speech? That's the way it's supposed to work. But the difference here, though, is that we all are supposed to be guaranteed the rights that are outlined in the Bill of Rights. Freedom of speech isn't just for Americans. It isn't just for white people. It isn't just, for rich people. It's for everybody, every one of us. And that's the beauty of what rights are all about. They give us the freedom to act in our lives, to say things, to do things, to move, to be able to have liberty to make our own choices. Freedom of speech, in my opinion, is the most important of all of the rights that are outlined in the Bill of Rights. But the issue at hand here is that should someone have more or less rights than someone else? And I'd say no. And so while I agree, Mike, that individuals do have immunity when it comes to speech, or they're supposed to have immunity, the difference here is that's supposed to apply to everybody. It doesn't give exceptions to the President of the United States. Okay, let's go on to our next comment. And again, if you want to get involved, just type your comment or question in Facebook, X, or YouTube. Let's go here to Star Wars Games 66. And this was the podcast episode segment that I did about, Trump and tariffs. And people were saying, well, it's just a sales tax. What's the big deal? Tariffs sound good to me. You're not taxing my income. That way I only have to spend money on taxes when I buy things. So Star Wars Game says it's actually a good idea because it lowers income tax. People keep all of their income. And since they don't have as much purchasing power, it actually taxes people more fairly based on how much they consume. No longer does it punish people for becoming intrinsically successful. Okay, now, there are two issues that are being conflated here. The whole idea of a consumption tax and tariffs. They're similar, but they're not the same. Let's just assume for the fact that there was a consumption tax, a national sales tax, if you were. And, what do you pay for sales tax? Here in our community, I think is it 8.75%? I think that's what it is. In some cities in California, the sales tax is over 10%, which is insane. But let's pretend that there was a national consumption tax of 10%. Now, would that be better or worse than an income tax? I think there's some good arguments on both sides of that. Some people will say consumption tax harms the poor, and the fair tax, which maybe you've heard of, the fair tax is a consumption tax, but it provides certain protections for the poor because you're only taxed above the poverty level of spending. But at any rate, are tariffs just like another sales tax? I say no, because tariffs are politically motivated policies that impact certain industries and certain corporations at the expense of others. Like, for example, Joe Biden has a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, which to me is idiotic. For a Democrat that says they want to fight climate change, China is now making very affordable EVs, and he wants to block them. Why? Obviously, to protect Big Auto, to protect Detroit, protect all the union workers in the UAW that are his support base or part of it. But tariffs, in this case, are specific to those particular vehicles. If you buy a different kind of a vehicle, you buy a domestic car, it's not tariffed. So you have this politically motivated case of picking winners and losers. In my opinion, that's immoral. That is just wrong. Now, is a consumption tax fairer than an income tax? Generally speaking, I would say yes, because you have a little more control over that. of over your consumption. Does a consumption tax hit the poor harder than the rich? Yeah, it does, because the poor have less disposable income. Um, there's all kinds of arguments for a flat income tax and what's the best way to do that. But are tariffs just a sales tax? I don't think so. I think they're a much more politically motivated tool to reward some people at the expense of others. Okay, let's go to another comment here in our community forum. And this is from an anonymous user. And it was my comment about our presidential race, which I think is just bananas. Trump and Biden, two terrible choices for very different reasons, and in some cases for the same reason. And I think that's what anonymous user is saying. He goes on to quote, "To end the divisions and let government get on with governing, they should both admit they're too old for the job before it gets ugly." I agree, completely agree. What's your take on this? Now, if you're a rational, objective person and you saw Joe Biden in the debate, it's clear that he does not have the same mental acuity, the same reasoning skills, the same ability to kind of form thoughts and express them, because he's older. And age hits people differently. There are some Democrats that insist that Joe Biden is the sharpest guy in the room when they're in closed door meetings, that Joe Biden is full of energy and you should have seen him at this rally, or you should have seen him here. That debate performance does not match the Joe Biden that I see. Well, my thing is that I think they blocked a lot of the debates in the Democratic primary in order to hide the decline of Biden. And if you are a rational Democrat, it should be obvious. And more people are coming forward. George Clooney came forward just today that said it's time for Biden to step down and replace him with someone new, because they know of the risk of Trump. And the fact that Biden's decline, just gives people a reason to not vote for Biden. Not to necessarily vote for Trump, but maybe just not to show up on election day. But look at Trump. Well, while Trump certainly has a lot more energy and appears to be more sort of, quote, with it during his rallies, that dude is spewing nonsense out of the side of his mouth all the time as well. I mean, he's making comments about boats and batteries and sharks and Hannibal Lecter and all this crazy ass stuff in his rallies. And we've heard all kinds of other cases where he's flubbed and gaffed, said nonsense things, Kovefe, remember that one? And there's a lot of other examples of President Trump showing his age as well, struggling to drink water, needing to have his hand held to walk down a stage. So many different things. Both of these guys are too old, in my opinion. I remember when Democrats thought Reagan was too old, not just when he ran for re-election in 1984. They thought he was too old in 1980. President Reagan was in his 60s then, and now they're supporting a candidate that is in far worse condition than President Reagan in 1980, in Joe Biden. That is showing far more signs of decline and actually defending Joe Biden on this case. Some of my friends on the left are living in denial. I agree with you, anonymous user. They're both too old. In my opinion, there is a huge, huge opportunity for the Democrats to nominate someone else, to pick someone that is young and youthful and vibrant, because that's usually what Democratic candidates used to be. John Kennedy, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, a new generational leader. How about finding someone there that is a Democrat that's appealing to independents, isn't like a hardcore lefty, more of a centrist Democrat? There's a great opportunity there to bring someone in like that could really change the course, not just of America, but give people some reason to believe and support these guys. So tell me what you think of that. Oh, we got Mike Devine on the live stream. Let's get a couple of Mike Devine's comments in here, because he's always got something to say. He says, hi, John Riley. What the hell is that avatar picture of you? It looks like you're like in an outdoor shower by a public beach. Okay, Mike says maybe Putin can help Hillary find her emails. And Mike Devine says, I won't use my age and experience against. Yeah, that's Ronald Reagan and the Walter Mondale quote, which was one of the great ones of all time. But yeah, in my opinion, both these guys are too old. And anonymous user, I agree with you. Okay, one more comment before we wrap up this episode. And this is from Rob Morgan, also commenting on this notion of sales taxes. And actually, this one, no, excuse me, this one's about the Chevron case, but the Supreme Court essentially saying the Chevron case is not constitutional, and it's now creating this opportunity for the executive branch to get rid of a lot of these federal agencies. And Rob said, Chevron only works when corruption is the exception and not the norm. I'm a scientist. The government no longer can do science. It's a joke. Compare Boeing and NASA to SpaceX. FDA lives in Pfizer's back pocket. A jury is a bunch of uneducated, superstitious fools, quote, or parentheses, thanks to the terrible education system, but you can't buy off every juror in America. Okay, I think this is dead on. So right now, we both know there's a tremendous amount of corruption, not just in the campaign finance that goes to fund all of these presidents and senators and congressmen and governors, all these wealthy influencers trying to fund their campaigns, to get in cahoots with these government officials so they can have some influence on the laws and the rules that are being built in America. This has only gotten worse as the regulatory state has grown. I mean, back before Chevron, that was 1984. If you go back, like the 1970s, some of the agencies were created then, the Department of Education, the EPA. And you may say what you will about those organizations, but that was the beginning of the regulatory state. Now we have an endless list of alphabet agencies. The executive branch has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. And because they've had more and more power, more and more control, the ability to write regulations by just unaccounted bureaucrats or so-called experts, now the executive branch has become so much more politicized and corrupted. So Rob Morgan's right here. He goes on to say, I'm a scientist. The government can no longer do science. The government shouldn't do science, period. Full stop. Because when government is involved with science, then the science becomes politicized. And we saw that with COVID, and we saw that with the vaccines, and we've seen this in countless other examples. In my opinion, we need a separation of church and state. We also need a separation of religion and state. Excuse me, church and state, that's religion and state. We also need a separation of science and state, education and state, healthcare and state, and the economy and the state. Because look at what's going on in our world right now. The economy is hotly charged, highly politicized, highly regulated. Healthcare, tremendously regulated. We get really high prices. That's part of the reason why housing is expensive, because of the regulatory actions, the zoning actions. Housing has become politicized. Other parts of our community, of our economy, have been politicized. And in this case, science has been politicized. The government shouldn't do science at all. Scientists should do science. Research should be done by researchers, and those should be privately funded. Now, should the government use experts to help them interpret the law? I think, or maybe make some of the law. I think there's a case for that. But right now, those agencies have become so politicized that the regulatory code isn't just to protect the children, isn't just to make for clean air and clean water, like a lot of people think regulations do. Now regulations have gotten to the point where they've set up systems to rig the market to make it harder for competitors to come into the market. I mean, consider, right now, President Biden is doing victory laps, saying how he helped allow the negotiation of prescription drugs in Medicare Part D. And because for 20 years, they were not allowed to negotiate with Big Pharma for all the prescription drugs in Medicare. which sounds crazy, right? But that's an example of a regulation that was put in that, who does that serve? In this case, it serves big pharma like Pfizer, just like he's saying, just like Pfizer. The FDA is in their back pocket. 100% agree with that. And he goes on to say a terrible education system. You know, it used to be that California had the best schools. Now we're near the bottom, despite spending probably more than any other state. We used to have the higher test scores, SAT scores here in California, and now they've been mostly flat for decades, despite the fact that there's a lot more spending. And at the same time, there's resistance to competition to the public school system in the form of private schools, charter schools, school vouchers, et cetera. Tremendous resistance from the education establishment trying to block competition. So when you see what's going on with government officials at the federal, state, and even at the local level, the policies that are being put forward are there to protect certain special interests at the expense of others. It's the exact opposite of equality under the law, or treating people equally and supporting everyone's inalienable right to their own life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So this one I thought was great. I mean, there's been a lot of people that are saying, oh, this is terrible. The Supreme Court is, by getting rid of Chevron, now you're going to have politicians that aren't even scientists making the rules. You know, because we got to know how many particulates of carbon in the atmosphere and how many particulates is too high or too low. And we need to science this thing out. But these so-called experts, these bureaucrats in these federal agencies are not ivory tower, unbiased scientists that are true to their mission. If they're a government agency, they're appointed or hired by political figures with political agendas, and a lot of politicization of how the rules are created is what happens in each of these state capitals, in our federal capital, and even our local city halls. So tell me what you think of that. Okay, so we've got a few more here comments in our live stream. I want to get everybody involved. Let's turn this portion of the screen off. Okay, I'm having a little trouble here. Okay, let's go here, and we'll go to Mike Devine. Oh no. For some reason, my comments are not showing, but I'm going to read them to you. Mike Devine says, I voted for Bill Clinton because he was youthful compared to the old Bush. That's funny. That's 1992, right? So you didn't vote for the old Perot or the old Bush. You voted for the